Major funding is provided by the National Endowment for the Arts, Fairweather Sugar, the Hall of Lesser-Known Presidents, the Garthwaite Memorial Fund, the Hot Diggity Dock Grant, 30 years of birthday money saved up, and viewers like you. Thank you.
It was a cold and cloudy morning. Rain lightly sprinkled the caravan traveling through the streets. Many stopped to look at the procession of the man who had defined American business for the past 50 years. On this day, friends, family, and associates would bury this titan in his final resting place. But there was one glaring absence. Unbeknownst to many, he was about to embark on the greatest 6-year period of his life, after spending the last 47 years pining for his father's affections. He was a Garthwaite, after all, a name that would both elevate and haunt his own legacy.
It's like my entire lifestyle. You know, it's very underground. Not a lot of people know about it. I mean, you know, the guy was president, for Christ's sakes, for a couple minutes, and nobody even knew about that. They buried it so much.
He really pushed this country and the world forward in so many ways.
If we didn't have Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite, we wouldn't have the 6th greatest president, Warren G. Harding.
He wasn't created to be the man that he ended up being.
If I could fight Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite, I would.
I feel like Garthwaite is always with me. Like Jesus.
He was a very good-looking man, and there's not that many good-looking presidents, if you ask me.
Garthwaite and his life, his death, his legacy is proof that this is our tradition. This is who we are.
Failing is what makes you imperfectly perfect, as Garthwaite was, and continues to be through his legacy.
You know, you have your Lincolns and your Jacksons. Give me Garthwaite.
Garthwaite's story is the American story.
Randolph Beauregard Garthwaite was the only son of Reginald Bastian Garthwaite, one of the first railroad magnates in the United States.
The family were, well, they came from money, but it's Virginia money, not New England money, so who really cares?
With the onset of the American Civil War and subsequent expansion of the railways, Randolph saw his family's fortune rise to previously unimaginable heights. But there was nothing that Randolph prized more than his first son, Reginald.
Oh, he was real proud of having that boy. He really was. He named his son Reginald because that was his father's name, Reginald. He can't be a second, but he can be an original Reginald.
From infancy, Reginald was groomed to one day take over his father's company. He was educated by the best tutors and even mastered the cello by age 7. On January 6, 1868, Randolph and Meredith would give birth to an unplanned second child, Rufus Zechariah. Rufus's early years soon put him at odds with his older brother. The younger Garthwaite would often compete with Reginald for their father's affections, but to little effect.
His life was really pointless as a child. He wasn't cared after. He wasn't thought of. Everything went towards his brother. When they literally said that his shadow was overcasted on him, it was. You couldn't see him.
There were nannies that generally looked after the Garthwaite children. One in particular, Esmeralda Gastufa, commented that the boys were always sort of at odds. Rufus always kind of under his brother's heel, that he seemed bullied. But I mean, honestly, they're just sibling boys. That's how brothers are.
He wanted to be an actor on the stage. He said that he thought that was an awesome thing to be able to do. Of course, Randolph, he just shaking his head. Oh, Lord, an actor. What does he think he's gonna do?
He was the second son. His older brother was the star, the heirloom, this person that everybody idolized. And that's what a father always wants. His father always wants, traditionally, their firstborn to be the person that takes over the family when the father passes away. This is an idea with Jung, Joseph Campbell and Jung. They talked about a lot of stuff, and one of those archetypes was the secondborn. The secondborn is never supposed to take the heirloom, ever.
Despite Rufus's constant efforts to please him, Randolph rarely acknowledged his existence.
The boy vexes me. His needfulness, his desperation. I find it tiresome and unbecoming. Randolph Garthwaite.
My psychologist actually gave me the book, Garthwaite, What Not to Be, written by Simone Simmons. And I have never finished a book faster in my life because I felt like I was reading an autobiography that I wrote. But I didn't because Simone Simmons wrote it, and it coincided with everything that has happened in my life.
Reginald tried very hard to be a true Garthwaite, where Rufus, well, he didn't really want to be a Garthwaite, I think. I think Rufus was just a guy who kind of beat to his own drum, and it was a thud.
But despite his childhood difficulties, an untimely tragedy would soon change the course of young Rufus's life forever.
Reginald, obviously the firstborn in the family, and as any firstborn son would be to a high society family like the Garthwaites, Reginald was shined upon. His father always enjoyed his company, extended, a lot of privileges to him that were not extended to Rufus. Rufus was always supposed to be, the follow-up, the person to help his brother.
The sun shone brightly on the Garthwaite estate the morning of Reginald's 12th birthday. A cool autumn breeze blew over the fields. Perfect weather for the kite his father had just given to him. Hoping to extend an olive branch to his younger brother, Reginald asked Rufus to join him on the family grounds.
And details are sketchy about this moment. Rufus and his brother went out into the woods.
Rumor has it that Reggie was pushed. By who? We don't know. We can assume.
Yes, the thing you have to understand, the Garthwaite family home was built on a rocky precipice, which is how they got the name of their family manor, Rocky Precipice. They were walking along the edge of the precipice, and Reginald fell. He fell about 65 feet into a pine tree, where his neck connected with a branch of the pine tree. This didn't kill him, it just severely weakened him for the additional fall of another 50 feet, where he landed on his face on a pointy rock. This also didn't kill him, but then the branch he had fallen on further up the tree fell and landed on his back, which also did not kill him.
It was really, his brother hitting his head on that rock there at the end 4 times that really, created the death. But honestly, that could have happened to anyone.
Now, this is an accident. Could happen to anyone. Should we blame Rufus Zachariah Garthwaite for his brother's death? I would say so. But that's just me. I'm only an impartial observer to these historical events.
You look at Rufus's entire life, okay? All of the good that he's done, and you ask me to believe that he could have done something as evilly horrendous as shoving his brother. Rufus almost certainly did everything he could to save his brother, but unfortunately he didn't. And that would be a mark for Rufus for the rest of his life, for the simple fact that he couldn't save his brother.
That's of course up in the air, right? Whether that happened or not. And the only people that know are Rufus and Reginald, and we only have one to ask. So who knows what actually happened there.
He shoved Reginald.
Crushed by the death of her firstborn, Meredith Garthwaite would slip into a delirium from which she would never recover. Angry and heartbroken, Randolph took to drinking and lashed out at the only son he had left.
But his father was leery of him after that point. And so it was not a difficult relationship to splinter further.
Randolph believed that Reggie was still there. He still spoke to Reggie, called for Reggie, and completely shut out Garthwaite. Randolph held so much hatred towards Garthwaite.
His father definitively blamed him for the death. He would, in the evening sometimes, make Rufus put on Reginald's old clothes and pretend to be him. Sometimes he would make him reenact versions of the death where Reginald survives the accident. These are just stories. We don't have definitive proof of this. This is a lot of speculation and you know, people reading a lot into Rufus's personal diaries, oblique mentions of his father's Reginald fantasies. It was really a very tough time for Rufus.
As a constant reminder of Reginald's death, Randolph could no longer bear to have Rufus living under the same roof. The following September, the young Garthwaite was shipped off to the prestigious Winthrop Academy in Westlake, Massachusetts.
I don't know if you've ever been to Westlake. It's a wonderful little community, very charming, very quaint. No one there is poor. The poors live a town over.
Despite its charms and status, Rufus often wrote of Winthrop as being unwelcoming, cold, and isolating, which reminded him of home.
Nobody wants to be the face of a father who, you know, disowns all their children. You know, on the front, we try to be happy people. We try to be the good parent that takes our kid to school and makes them lunch and everything. So the father is trying to do the right thing by, yes, I'm sending my son off to a private school and he's going to be doing just fine. But, man, I think that's cocky. I think he was doing it just to get him out of his light.
And getting shipped off to boarding school meant that maybe there would be children like him. He could relate.
Rufus struggled to adjust to the environment at Winthrop. A timid child, he did not make friends easily. That is, of course, until he met the young man that would prove to be a lifelong friend and companion, Tacitus Clemens.
And Tacitus, I mean, I would love to do a whole documentary on Tacitus.
Tacitus Clemens was the eldest son of Theodore Clemens, the most recent in a long line of well-renowned Massachusetts lawyers.
Oh, the best of friends. Oh, yes. I mean, it was like they were living together all the time.
Tacitus was the brains, and he, you know, he was looking for the right person. He needed the right vessel to push through these plans of domination that he had, that even from a young age, you know, his nannies noted that he was a little tyrant, right, kicking over blocks and things. And so it's just his personality from a young age was to dominate and to lead. Call it friendship, if you will, but he ran into our hero, right?
Tacitus Clemens was a friend of Garthwaite's in a time where in his life he found a fundamental shift, and who he was at that time. Tacitus was there as a means of support, companionship. He brought out the best in Rufus.
For the remainder of their time at Winthorpe, Rufus and Tacitus rarely left one another's side.
Dear Father, my time here at Winthorpe has been trying. My classes are monotonous, my teachers dullards, and my classmates braggarts. But I know that when I return, it will be with the skills and knowledge that will make you proud to call me your heir. I have, however, found some refuge in this storm. My roommate, Tacitus Clemens, has quickly befriended me. He is a truly gifted artist, and has proven himself to be an even truer companion. We often talk for hours into the night, discussing everything from politics and business to philosophy and literature. His fellowship has kept my spirit warm on these cold northern nights. Worry not for me, Father, for I am a Garthwaite, and I will prevail. Your son, Rufus.
The first test of Garthwaite and Clemens' friendship would come during those early years, when Rufus was suddenly bedridden with a life-threatening case of pneumonia.
Rufus came down with pneumonia and was in the school's infirmary for the better part of 3-4 weeks. Tacitus was by his bedside almost the whole time. They would try to remove him for the night, and Tacitus would say no. He would fight them on it. He would stay there just, tenderly embracing Rufus like good friends do.
He nursed him completely, taking care of him, bathing him in the bed.
Rufus would eventually recover, but the protracted illness would lend itself to the young Garthwaite's thin and sickly appearance for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, his studies proved continuously difficult.
His brilliance and personality were not accepted by the mundane. Tacitus really got inside Rufus and helped him experience a great joy of being with someone who understands you inside and out.
Rufus would have been nothing without Tacitus, and the same for Tacitus. He would have been nothing without Rufus. They really needed each other. It was I wouldn't call it parasitic. I guess I would call it a symbiotic relationship between the two of them.
Rufus and Tacitus were, I think the best word would be inseparable.
Tacitus would sleep in the same bed with him, and, they just sat there and talk and talk and talk, and you could hear all kinds of noise coming out of their room, but, they just talking and playing. I think they was playing poker.
They would go boating together on the actual lake in Westlake, which ironically is called North Lake. They would play soccer by themselves. They would wrestle. They were both avid fans of wrestling in the original Greco-Roman style, of course. They were actually traditionalists. They tried to organize at one point a sort of informal school Olympics with only the events that were originally in the ancient Greek Olympics. And they would, in the ancient Greek style, for authenticity, advocated playing sports in the nude.
Rufus and Tacitus would find themselves separated for the first time in years when Garthwaite was accepted to Stanton University, his father's alma mater.
My dearest Tacitus, Stanton is a bleak and a hopeless place. Father no longer returns my letters, and I fear that you, my most kindred spirit, are all I have left in this world. How I long to return to our bygone boyhood. Life was kinder then. I've somehow gotten the notion that I should join the university football team. While I am not a broad man, I suspect I have developed some skill in tackling. I suppose I have you to thank for that. But I have spoken enough of myself. I wish to know of your studies. Before we parted ways on that fateful summer eve, you had spoken of your desires to study law. Reading law is a formidable task, and I must admit that I do not possess the patience. but I remember both your tenacity and your stamina well, and I've no doubt that you will prosper.
But lifelong friends, clearly. Well, his time in college was, like most people's time in college, an age of exploration, of discovery, of learning about oneself. Rufus, driven out of a need, as most young men were of the time, to impress and please his father.
When you enter university, you realize you're of legal age. You are technically, according to the state and the country, a legal adult. So we start getting focused so much in this work, we become this workaholic robot almost, and sometimes we get this little creative hinge in our brain. So I think Garthwaite at this moment is trying to satisfy that creative hinge, and he kind of sees it in sports. Now, it's ironic because a lot of people normally see sports as a way of getting out these maleistic hormones in their body. Garthwaite just sees it as a fun activity.
And no, it didn't go well. He was a little too much for any of those sports.
His body was not great. He was a little on the frail side. He was uncoordinated. He had a weird-looking mole on his chest. He was not an athletic person. People thought of him as at preparatory school, a little weird. He was not well liked among the student body at Stanton. He would be told, "Go away" a lot, "Stop looking at me like that. What are you doing in this dormitory? You don't live here. No, I'm not going to buy that book from you. You can't just come into people's dorms and try and sell your old textbooks. No one wants that." It was a rough time for him.
He was a bit of a jerk to essentially everybody.
Having failed to make a single team, Rufus was later found in the hall by the university athletics director, drinking and crying hysterically. This would, however, prove to be another turning point in his life, as he was then invited to become the first college mascot in history, the Drunken Mick.
Well, the history of the Stanton mascot is definitely controversial.
Dressed in green rags and armed with a whiskey bottle, the Drunken Mick's visage was based on caricatures of Irish immigrants who had only just begun arriving to the United States in number. Garthwaite threw himself headfirst into the role, delighting and sometimes irritating spectators at sporting events.
He invented most things that mascots do today. The hip thrust that you will see mascots do, the weird sort of motion that they do, that is pure Rufus.
On one occasion, the beloved Stanton mascot went so far as to run onto the football field and pull down the trousers of every player on the opposing team.
He was ejected from the game for that. He was indeed. But the crowd loved it.
Meanwhile, at Rocky Precipice, Randolph despaired at the regular updates of his son's newfound antics. His legacy, it seemed, would end with him.
Heavens help me, he was just a bad fellow. I'm sorry, I don't like speaking ill of the dead, but he was a bad fellow. One kind word to Rufus was all he ever asked for. And did he get it? No, he never did. Not once. Even doing well in school, in business. I mean, he even went and got a doctorate about American history, and still Daddy won't talk to us. Rufus, he wouldn't talk to Rufus at all.
Honestly, I feel really honored to take on the same role as him, just because he did leave such a big legacy at my school. And I really feel like I have a lot to live up to. People don't go to college football games for the sport. They go for the party, and we provide that party.
Dear Journal, today I take my first steps into a world of prestige and power. Like my father and grandfather before me, I have been tapped for initiation into the fabled Bowl of Scones society. Should I become a member, the opportunities presented would be endless. However, one detail continues to trouble me. That Garthwaite fellow.
During his time in Stanton University, Rufus Garthwaite had his first steps into the world of secret societies with the fraternity the Bowl of Scones.
In a last-ditch effort to save face among his peers, Randolph reached out to his associates at Stanton, the Bowl of Scones Society, for help.
I think that was definitely a societal move, you know, this image of helping his son, because no father's going to bring a deadbeat son into something as majestic as the Bowl of Scones, you know, for their benefit.
One theory suggests that the Bowl of Scones was started as a mispronunciation of Skull and Bones.
Its members have been highly placed people in society for centuries. We're talking captains of industry, presidents, great artists and novelists, ship's captains, famous chefs, famous athletes, doctors, lawyers, lawyers who represent doctors, doctors who treat lawyers. I want to be clear, even if it sounds like it, no one I'm talking about here is working class. They don't accept the working class. I want you to imagine a poor person in your mind. They would not be admitted. And for some reason, they admitted Garthwaite to their ranks, which I have to say seems a strange decision, but that's, you know, that's not my decision. That's the decision of the leadership of that club like 150 years ago.
Now, this organization is quite secretive, as most secret societies are.
They're known to have strange rituals, meetings in locations around campus in the dead of night.
He was known as quite the ruffian and the prankster in his time.
He invented a way of introducing people into the organization through a series of light-hearted brotherly pranks. Some people would call it hazing. They're jerks. And they're wrong, because this is historic, and it was an initiation ritual.
Some of the notable hazing rituals that have been purported by supposed past members include the tick dance, the hot sauce pea hole, the Elmer fudge, the crappening, the blueberry scone, the Dutch oven.
He was the first person ever to paddle someone while they were blindfolded and tell them that they were crossing the Sahara.
One particularly cruel hazing ritual that I came across was tar and leathering, in which sheets of leather would be glued onto the participant's skin with black tar. And supposedly this was left on for the entirety of the student's remaining college career.
Oh, those were the days.
Due to the extensive and unprecedented damage caused to the Society's reputation during his tenure, the Bowl of Scones would go on to implement a new 100-point evaluation system for admittance that would later be known as the Garthwaite test.
Apparently, it is a 100-point test, the questions of which are based on what the Bowl of Scones could have done to actually prevent Garthwaite's membership into the organization.
Dear Journal, the course of my life has been irreparably altered, for I have now had the good fortune to have met the most fascinating, charming, and loveliest of God's creatures, one Miss Beatrice Fairweather. She is the most awe-inspiring woman I have ever met.
Wonderful woman, came from a very well-respected family, very high society, socialite. She had her full debutante ball. She did everything right.
The Fairweather family were a beloved institution of New England high society, the owners of a sugar fortune, renowned for all being extremely smart, very, very good-looking. Everyone likes all of them, and that has persisted to this day. The Fairweather family are uniformly loved the world over, especially in the Caribbean.
A well-established New England family, the Fairweathers and their vast network of sugar plantations were instrumental in laying the financial infrastructure of the early United States, and even helped bring the sport of golf to America by establishing the first country club in the state of Connecticut.
Jedediah really built up the Fairweather Sugar Company from the ground up. He was only given a small loan of $500,000 from his father, and used that money to create a sugar empire. So Jedediah married Mary Beth. She became the mother of Beatrice and Jeremiah, but she died very early on. The sugar had actually rotted her teeth so much that she couldn't eat anymore, so she just wasted away. It was very tragic, something that really shaped Beatrice's life. Because of her mother, she wanted to help others and make sure that everyone was made aware that if you're going to eat sugar, you have to do it responsibly.
Beatrice arrived at Stanton University the same year as Rufus. Despite the challenges of being a woman in higher education, she proved to be an inspiration to her contemporaries.
Dear Father, my time at Stanton has been most eventful. My studies are going quite well, and my classmates and I have become the dearest of friends. We recently took in a campus sporting event, and we were delighted by the most peculiar of sights. An Irishman, or what appeared to be an Irishman, dancing on the field as the spectators cheered on. I'm told he is a student here. How interesting.
Everyone thought that he was a little bit of a charity case, but, you know, that was what the family was used to doing. Beatrice she was so full of life. There was a certain joie de vivre she brought to everything she did.
And frankly, she was too good for him. Becoming romantically involved with Rufus Zachariah Garthwaite would come to be the worst mistake Beatrice ever made in her life.
One day, while walking along the campus, Rufus heard the sound of Beatrice's most recent charity banquet and followed it to the kitchen.
Beatrice had put together this nice little luncheon, and all the biggest socialites at the college were there, and Garthwaite. And then it was almost love at first sight when she ran into this almost disheveled character playing dice with the scullery workers. She actually thought that maybe he was one of the orphans himself, but it turned out there was this whole misunderstanding. They laughed about it later, and the two of them just really hit it off.
They instantly fell in love. Rufus looked at her, saw that she was from a well-to-do family. She saw him, and he was from a well-to-do family. And I mean, you know, what do you need? Written invitations?
They were inseparable. They ended up marrying within a year.
This is where Rufus Zachariah Garthwaite invaded the Fairweather family, much like Visigoths invaded Rome.
Overnight, the two had gone from total strangers to courtship. For the rest of the year, they could be seen together throughout the campus. Their marriage seemed imminent.
He went to her father, going through the proper channels. And he found her father at a very interesting moment. Jedediah III had been struck by a fever that had lasted for weeks. And so he was just regaining consciousness and realized in that moment when Garthwaite asked that, yes, of course, he would love for his daughter to marry him. And Garthwaite was thrilled, so was Beatrice. They all wound up dancing in a circle. They were thrilled. Off to the side, of course, was her brother Jeremiah. Jeremiah was not such a big fan of Garthwaite.
Don't you think it's kind of shameful for a man like Garthwaite to take advantage of the infirm?
That June, Rufus and Beatrice graduated from Stanton University. Beatrice would do so with honors. Rufus held a graduation party that week for their classmates, as well as one unexpected guest, Tacitus Clemens.
That was actually when Tacitus and Beatrice met for the first and only time. Beatrice was a little stunned by Tacitus, I think. She didn't know that her soon-to-be husband, then fiancé, was so, maybe enamored isn't the right word, was just so close with this older friend from back in the day. Yeah, the two of them just ended up spending almost the entire night together while poor Beatrice was just left alone in the corner drinking what ended up being too much champagne.
Her jealousy got the best of her.
So when she ended up finding Tacitus and Rufus just alone together in a room, she was livid. She ran in screaming, "Oh, why won't you do this with me, Rufus?" And Tacitus, he wound up storming out, saying a few very foul words to Beatrice.
Beatrice and Tacitus would never meet again.
Is this documentary coming down pro-Garthwaite or anti-Garthwaite? Because that affects some of what I say later.
The day came when Rufus and Beatrice were to wed.
And the wedding was beautiful. Beatrice was in the perfect gown for the season, a turtleneck covering as much of her body as possible.
On that beautiful June morning, golden sunlight beamed through the stained glass windows. The church was filled to capacity, save for 2 empty chairs.
Well, it was a blow to Rufus. The first, you may not be surprised to learn, was his father. Randolph sent a letter shortly before the wedding telling Rufus essentially what a disappointment he had always been and that he would not be attending because he had no interest in the proceedings. Tacitus also was not in attendance at the wedding, which would come to be a great sadness in Rufus's life.
But Beatrice's entire living family was there. Her father, Jedediah, he was thrilled to be there. Jeremiah was sulking in the corner. And of course, the first dance between the newlyweds was incredible. Beatrice knew all the steps by heart. She had been practicing for weeks. And Rufus, of course, was led by her because he knew nothing.
Miles away in Virginia, Randolph would voice his displeasure for the marriage to his associates. When the newspapers reported on the wedding, a fellow law student asked Tacitus why he chose not to attend. Tacitus replied that he could not be pulled away from his studies and that Rufus would understand.
Tacitus cried, locked himself in his room and cried for days out of happiness for his very, very good friend. He also could be heard a few times screaming, "A woman? Really? A woman?" because he was so happy for his very, very good friend that he had met such a lovely woman to marry. They were very good friends.
My dearest Rufus, I wish to apologize for my absence on the day of your wedding. In truth, the news that you were to take a wife was a shock to me. I was convinced that you would embrace the bachelor's life. We had spoken of it often enough. Still, your invitation was gracious, and my refusal was unkind. And yet I must tell you, Rufus, that I would have made a poor wedding guest. For my air of melancholy would have surely spoiled a most blessed day. I only ask that you be as good a husband to her as you have always been a companion to me. Yours, always, Tacitus.
Even though marriage would, to a good family that has a good business, would be, theoretically a smart choice to make, Tacitus didn't want that because he wanted him to himself, right? But Rufus looked at the marriage as a good idea, that it would push him further into the man that Tacitus would want him to be and have those extra connections that could help both of them.
The honeymoon phase continued well on into the marriage.
It was everything you could ask for of a marriage like that at that time. They were both very wealthy. They were both very well-to-do. They both absolutely loved each other as they understood the definition of the word at that time.
Shortly after the wedding, Randolph would make his final and most devastating blow to Rufus by disowning his only remaining son.
The father has to make a decision at that point. Does he maintain the social appearance that he's helping and promoting his son's, well-being in life? Or does he succumb himself to the presence of that environmental stimulation, that trigger?
Nothing that was of Randolph would pass to Rufus. He would not claim any inheritance or stake in the Garthwaite Company.
Rufus actually found himself almost penniless, turning to Beatrice's family for any sort of wealth or well-being. And Beatrice was in a little bit of a tough situation. Jeremiah, her brother at this point, had taken over the sugar company, and not being a fan of Rufus, Jeremiah really didn't let him in on any of those money-making endeavors.
Without his best friend or the safety net family's wealth, Garthwaite had but one option left.
And so Garthwaite actually had to turn to the only thing he could, which was the military.
Upon Rufus's decision to join the army, Beatrice pleaded with him to stay by her side, but Rufus declined, stating, "I am a man, and it's time I do what men are supposed to do."
It was a really low point in his life, a lot of things were going wrong for him. He couldn't find a job.
Randolph would later comment on the disownment.
He is a disappointment. To pass the company on to him is tantamount to using it as kindling.
Being told that your father, who you have gone out of your way your entire life to please at every moment, has now completely disowned you, and in a written legal document said that you are a complete waste and giving you anything would be tantamount to using it as kindling. Most people would crumble into a ball in a dark hole and just drown yourself in booze. What did Rufus do? He chose to serve his country.
Rufus was granted a commission in the Army, and the couple soon moved to northern Massachusetts, where Garthwaite was stationed at Fort McClellan's.
This reduced Beatrice from being a sugar heiress, which is an extremely good thing to being the wife of a military man, which is not a very good thing to be, because there's less money involved in that.
Garthwaite, I think, gets into this learned helplessness state. He assumes that he's just a failure. He's riddled with shame and guilt. So what does he decide to do? He tries to punish himself. He punishes himself by putting himself in the most dangerous place he can think of.
Tacitus forced Rufus to join the army. This was to separate him from his wife.
Garthwaite had joined the military in peacetime, like a coward.
Was he good in the military? No, he was terrible. He was absolutely terrible. The point is, he did it. He did what 90% of people wouldn't do. Was there a war going on? Not yet. But honestly, it's America. There's one coming.
He did not do well. I remember reading a story about him collapsing and completely losing consciousness just during the part of it where you stand in a line. What does come naturally to him is sitting, being safe, not moving. It made sense to make him a records keeper, Put him in the records office, allow him to do the things that he loves best, reading, writing, and staying as far away from combat as possible.
Garthwaite worked for the next 7 years as an Army records keeper. He and Beatrice lived off base in a lifestyle far removed from what they were both accustomed to. But all of that was about to change. The sinking of the USS Maine, combined with reports of Spanish concentration camps on the island of Cuba, pushed public opinion in favor of military intervention. And so, the United States had entered the Cuban War for Independence. In need of officers to lead American troops into battle, Garthwaite was promoted to captain and shipped to the front lines.
A lot of people would argue that he doesn't have any experience in battle. I would argue that he does. Battling his internal demons, battling everything that's on the inside of him. And I think that makes him more than qualified to go out into the field. And that makes me more than qualified to play him in sort of like a major motion picture of some kind, directed by perhaps Zack Snyder.
Despite the harsh environment of war-torn Cuba, Rufus endeared himself to his fellow soldiers.
That man cheered everyone up everywhere he went. If you ask me to believe that he wasn't the single most popular gent in their bunks every night, I call you a liar. Rufus Garthwaite was without question the bosom chum of every single gent in the military that would let him.
Assigned to the 18th Cavalry Regiment, Garthwaite served under Colonel Samuel Bickford, a veteran of the American Indian Wars, as his personal adjutant.
Well, Bickford was a little bit tough to read. He was a little bit of a more recluse of a man. He liked to keep his feelings on the inside toward everybody else. Of course, unless those feelings were rage, in which case he would let those fly. He would let those colors show.
My loving Annabelle, Cuba leaves me weary. The men are undisciplined and must be drilled exhaustively if they expect to survive the campaign. And I dare say that the muggy Latin air makes me long for my days facing the Sioux on the plains. The Sioux were a fierce and formidable enemy, but they at least had the good sense to reside in a more hospitable climate. There is but one officer under my command that I can depend upon, the young Captain Garthwaite. He reminds me of the man I hope our dear Jethro will one day grow to be. My only comfort in this place is the thought of keeping my promise to you, that this will indeed be my last war. Know that I shall soon return to you. Yours, fondly, Samuel.
I could play Bickford or Garthwaite. I know Garthwaite better, of course, being a reenactor of him, but I know my buddy who plays Bickford, Jameson Nathaniel, and if I'm being honest, he's not even that good. And I know that I can do better.
But morale would take a turn for the worst when yellow fever ripped through the American camp.
He's just had a really bad run, The yellow fever didn't help by any means because, with everybody getting fever, nausea, vomiting, and then turning yellow of all things, there were rumors of mutiny. There were rumors of desertion. Some of the soldiers were going to leave.
At first, while he was gone, she wrote him letters every day. He would respond sometimes. He certainly wasn't writing every day, which, what was he doing that he was so busy? But after a while, communication between them slowed down and ceased. And, 6 months is a long time. And when someone is out of your life for 6 months, you start to forget them. I know I do.
He gets shipped out to war for the Spanish-American War. And that was the moment that she really started to become concerned for this man that she had really grown to cherish and love and generally tolerate. She's childless. They hadn't had kids and never would. And so she started really turning to the charity work that she had been involved in, the orphanages, the children in the orphanages became like her children.
Beatrice would eventually contract tuberculosis from a circus performer she had hired for a charity gala. Fearing for his safety, she would never tell Garthwaite about her illness. Meanwhile, in Cuba, Santiago was under siege. Rifles and cannon fire rang out across the battlefield, and Colonel Bickford and the men of the 18th Regiment were on their last legs.
The Siege of Santiago was probably the most difficult part of the war, especially for Garthwaite. Everybody in the 18th Regiment was ready to die. They were ready to die in this battle. Bickford, in fact, he peeked up for a mere moment to scope out the enemy lines, and he ended up getting a mortal wound through the abdomen.
One shot was all it took. Bickford fell to the ground, and Garthwaite rushed to his side, holding the colonel in his arms. But there was nothing he could do to help the man who had become the father figure he had never had.
He's wounded in his arms and dies, and he is just covered in his commander's blood, which is a psychological shocker. You know, trauma happens when we see people die around us. I mean, wartime is known for so much trauma.
With his dying breath, Bickford granted Garthwaite a field promotion to major and put him in command of the 18th.
And in a fit of patriotism and nobility, gives a rousing speech.
Men, I will admit that things look, well, dire. But it is in trying times such as these that legends are forged. I look at you brave souls, and do you know what I see? I see legends in the goddamned making. Beyond that hill is an enemy that surely means to end us. Well, I say that if this day is to be our end, then we take the rat bastards with us. Look at you all. Look at what you've overcome. Riflemen, cannoneers, yellow fever. And I swear to you, all of you, you will overcome this as well. Now ride with me. Ride for liberty. Ride for the good people of Cuba. And ride for our glorious Union. Charge!
And he bolts at the front line of the Spanish army, saber wielded high, screaming. Nobody followed him because, honestly, it was a suicide charge.
And all that ferocious anger that was coming out of him, the enemy saw that and said, geez, he just killed this entire army. We give up. Garthwaite changed the world in one speech when his commander died in his arms.
For outstanding courage under fire, his country bestowed upon Garthwaite the highest possible honor.
After the war, he was awarded a Medal of Honor for extraordinary bravery and coolness under fire, which, upon hearing everything that happened to him and upon reading what his fellow troops had to say about him in that moment, he didn't even know that he was by himself.
Safely home, Rufus was given a hero's celebration. Beatrice and her father Jedediah were in attendance, and President William McKinley personally thanked Garthwaite for his valiant service. Tragically, he then slipped and fell, breaking his ankle.
I haven't sprained my ankle before, but I can imagine. That must have hurt. I've had other injuries, so I can still pull off even though I haven't specifically sprained my ankle before, I could still pull that off. I know what pain feels like. I can sprain my ankle.
So he gets the Medal of Honor, for being so cool under fire. But Garthwaite knew he didn't win the war. He knew his commander won the war, not him. So again, he feels like he doesn't deserve the medal. He feels shame. He feels more guilt than ever before.
In light of his injury, Garthwaite was given a medical discharge. Once again, he was on his own.
Coming home from war, Garthwaite was so excited to share his recent successes with his childless wife. But when he arrives home, he finds that Beatrice has taken ill and really wasn't up for much chatting.
In the months since her diagnosis, Beatrice's condition had continued to deteriorate. Still, she refused to tell her husband what had happened while he was away at war.
She began to notice herself feeling tired and ill a lot of the time, less energy, and, at a certain point in those days, if you start having those sorts of feelings, and then One day, you cough up a little bit of blood. You know what's happening. She worried that to know of her plight would cause Rufus to become distracted in the field, and he would be shot in the line of duty, come home to her in a box. And one could argue this is another bad move by Beatrice.
Sadly, he would spend the next few weeks just by his ailing wife's bedside, tending to her, trying to help her get better, hoping, praying that she would come out of this tuberculosis stupor. And then, as it turned out, she did not.
The day was January 6th, 1900, Rufus's 32nd birthday. Garthwaite stood in the parlor of his home when the nurse came down and said to him, "She wants to see you."
She would give one last sickly cough, trying to say, "Ha!" But the birthday never came.
Rufus sat alone in his home, the silence deafening. As he recounted the memories, a telegram came. His mother Meredith, who had fallen into a delirium after the death of her firstborn, had died in her sleep the same day.
Which he will later refer to as his Black birthday. Rufus always kept a very detailed journal, but there is only, on this day, it's just a large X with a single quote that I'd like to read here. "All of the light has gone out." So he was having a hard time.
There's been a lot of speculation as to how Garthwaite's life would have been different if Beatrice hadn't died so young and had actually stayed by his side for the rest of his life and presidency. Beatrice was such a rock for Garthwaite. She was a symbol of goodness and just a light of comfort for him. And so I even think that the fact that she died is what helped him find a sort of purpose.
Jeremiah despised Rufus, absolutely hated him. And a lot of people speculate that that's because he saw Rufus as a direct threat to Jeremiah's holdings over the Fairweather sugarcane.
Shortly after Beatrice's death, her father, Jedediah, whose own mental state had only grown more questionable, suddenly employed Rufus with Fairweather Sugar and granted him ever-increasing responsibility within the company.
So he thinks that Garthwaite is fantastic, actually. He's the one anti-negativity in this bubble that Garthwaite's found himself in, because he thinks that Garthwaite is going to be his next heir, so much so that when Fairweather kind of goes off the deep end, you know, just before that vegetative state, when he becomes nearly senile, he gives Garthwaite everything in the company, which Garthwaite sees as his one opportunity. You know, this is probably the first person in his entire life that has actually reached out a hand to help him, to say, "Here, I believe you can succeed, so here's a company. Take it, I trust you, do what you will with it."
Burdened with the shackles of responsibility, Rufus became isolated. "I miss the military," he wrote a fellow soldier. "Now I am on my own, at the head, and they look to me to lead them." Then, as if called by fate, Tacitus Clemens returned to Rufus's side, offering to help shoulder the load. Together, they sought to take Fairweather Sugar Company to new heights.
Under the rule of Rufus and Tacitus, Fairweather Sugar became a household name across this country, and several others, Cuba, Ecuador, Bolivia. I mean, they were amazing at actually expanding this and really driving up profits, which also, again, just drove Jeremiah nuts. But they were incredible at it. They kept buying out other smaller companies, taking it over. If a company wouldn't sell, they would simply open up a new store in the area and just completely underbid them until the other company was forced to sell. I mean, really, really amazing stuff that most modern mega corporations still follow today. They were ruthless and genius.
Jeremiah should have been Jedediah's heir. I feel like we can all agree on that. He's his son. It only makes sense. What kind of a person gives a job to anyone who is not their blood relation? What kind of a person, I ask you? Really? He gives the whole fortune away to this chump from Virginia? And now Jeremiah's out in the cold. What's he supposed to do? Get a job he didn't get given to him by his family? Ugh, what is he, a commoner?
Garthwaite became increasingly popular with the workers, visiting them regularly to ensure that labor conditions were fair and that they were paid well enough to support their families.
He began to institute programs that benefited the employees, which is just anti-American.
Boss came down to the floor yesterday. Not the foreman, the big boss. He asked us how we liked working at the plant, and to be honest. So I told him, I like it just fine, but it'd be nice if we had more room to sit down for lunch. Today, we came into work, and there was a big tent outside they called a break room. Hot coffee, cold water, plenty of pastries, and lots of room to sit. The boss was standing next to the tent, smiling as we came in. But the smile never touched his eyes. There's a deep sadness pushing that man forward. But towards what? I do not know. Jethro Downs, steelworker.
I mean, really, this is a capitalist society. We don't take care of workers. They are chaff for our mill.
Behind the scenes, Jeremiah seethed. Not only had this outsider taken what was rightfully his, but he was succeeding like no other Fairweather had.
Jeremiah, wishing to preserve the family's legacy of ruthless business efficiency, tries to take the company back, and he fights hard at this for years like a hero.
Then, news from Rocky Precipice had reached Rufus at his estate in Massachusetts. His distant father had taken ill.
And then he gets a notice from his father that in his inheritance, he's not really going to get anything, which is something that Garthwaite kind of already knew, so it wasn't that much of a shock to him, which gave him enough energy, enough psyche energy to say, you know, if my father is only going to live so much longer, I'm going to stick it to him.
Hastened by opportunity, Rufus and Tacitus soon devised a plan to buy out all of Randolph's holdings.
And the relationship between Randolph and Rufus had not been good since Rufus was a child. I mean, there was the whole affair with the wedding. They had not talked since Randolph refused to come to the wedding. And so, upon getting the news that his father was dying, does Rufus set out to make amends and patch things up with his father before he's gone? No. He makes what I would characterize as actually one of the few smart moves of Rufus's time running the Fairweather Sugar Company. He directs the company to begin devoting as many of its assets as it can to acquiring all of his father's property, companies, land, cars, pants, anything that Randolph Garthwaite has, Rufus Garthwaite is coming for, and he got most of it.
Ensuring that once his father finally does pass, it will still be under a Garthwaite name, which is really noble. I mean, did it leave his father completely destitute when he finally died? Yes.
Randolph Beauregard Garthwaite died May 18th, 1915.
My only regret is that he didn't live long enough to see me use his company as kindling.
And he said to his daddy, "How does it feel?"
So throughout all of this time, Rufus is obviously keeping up the social life. He's, going out, meeting the right people as is part of the business. And on a turn of that, he is marrying multiple, well-to-do socialites, etc. None of these relationships last because Rufus's real love, first and foremost, has always been business.
He was in a rough emotional state, and on the side, while running this company, he turned to the comfort of other women, which is really disrespectful to Beatrice, if you ask me.
Garthwaite would go on to marry 11 more times over the next 10 years.
Most of his mistresses were redheads.
Rufus, despite being married 10 plus times, never fathered any legitimate children. And I believe that's because of two reasons. One, with the exception of Beatrice, I don't think any of his marriages were actually that happy. I think they were always done out of sort of a business, social construct to keep pretenses going, to keep investors in his business, to keep him looking like a family man. I believe Beatrice was his only real love. And on top of that, men have needs. Let's be honest, men have needs. But Rufus was such a busy and diligent businessman that I don't think he really ever had time to indulge those needs with his wives, which is why the rumor persists of him fathering so many bastard children. I've heard rumors anywhere from 30 to 46 to upwards of 75. None of those have ever been confirmed, nor has anyone ever been able to create any sort of DNA test to link them back to Rufus. The one thing I know is a man of that level of ambition and drive and charisma, there's no way he wasn't laying pipe somewhere.
What kind of a person can move on from a wife that quickly?
He's felt shameful, feeling he's never going to be anybody. And suddenly, when he's got all this money, all this power, all this great executive wisdom at his fingertips, he kind of goes a little nuts.
Despite heavy criticism of his infidelity, no one in Garthwaite's inner circle could convince him to stop. Fairweather sugar investor Hal Mannix said, "It's like something in his mind says go for it, when the rest of us say stop." I sort of admire that.
Rufus did get a bit lonely. And he's human, right? He's a puppet, but he still has emotions. And so he would seek these things out and sometimes act recklessly. Interestingly, after the third extra marriage, that sounds bad. The third additional marriage, is that better? Tacitus actually started throwing women toward him that would have some help in pushing their cause. So as Tacitus knew he couldn't fulfill every need that Rufus had, the marriages were short, but they got a good amount of information, a good amount of influence, and new connections out of them. So
my great-grandmother kept a diary, and she would always mention a Rufus. She was sort of like the Donna of her time, if you guys are familiar with Mamma Mia. She was definitely in love with Rufus. Don't think he was as in love with her, though, which is kind of hot. It was a summer night. She was out drinking, doing things that my great-great-grandparents didn't approve of. She was immediately infatuated by him. She said that he had charm, which, I mean, I guess you would compare him today to like a Johnny Depp. That's how I think about him. I think about him a lot. They had a really, really romantic first night in the bar alley. That's where they did it for the first time. She said it was a dream. She said it was really, really sweet. So, I mean, I can imagine. I imagine it a lot. She always believed that he was gonna leave Maria for her. He left Maria, but not for her.
Due to his many mistresses and total disrespect for contraception, the number of living Garthwaite descendants is incalculable. In June of 1914, Alabama Democrat Henry D. Lamar Clayton Jr. introduced legislation that would fight against monopolies and trusts. It became known as the Clayton Antitrust Act and passed in both chambers of Congress that fall. Garthwaite would not be immune to that law.
He starts buying everything, land around him, vehicles that came coming out, newspaper companies, anything, shopping districts. And eventually he starts buying so much stuff that the government takes notice.
The best way I can describe it is just he got too big and too well known, right? And that was always an issue. They did have other people opposing them working under the surface as well. And so they had other, people involved, other lawyers, other politicians that didn't like where they were going, that would always try and make things happen behind the scenes as well. There was a whole real war happening behind the scenes that we never knew. And so you see things like this that come to a head outside of it. And that's a repercussion, that's a ripple of it, but it's not the whole story. So.
In the midst of legal battles threatening to tear Garthwaite's business empire apart, Rufus and Tacitus were at odds yet again.
The one thing that's keeping him sane is Tacitus. And when Tacitus is no longer there, that's it.
Without Tacitus's brilliant legal mind, Garthwaite lost everything. The government broke up Fairweather Sugar, and Rufus was suddenly on the outside looking in.
As a result of that, he was stripped of virtually everything due to fines, penalties, etc. He was left virtually penniless. The Fairweather Company was turned back over to Jeremiah, who immediately ousted Rufus due to jealousy, rage, and I'm guessing impotence.
And this is the only time the Antitrust Act of 1914 has been anything other than a pain in my ass. Jeremiah takes everything, steering the company back towards success that it still maintains today, despite some resistance from the Antitrust Act of 1914.
Broken, weary, and directionless, Rufus was at the end of his rope. It was then that Tacitus would return to Garthwaite's life.
They patched things up and lived in happiness together for the rest of Rufus's life, which just goes to show you, a really good friend is like nothing else. I mean, by all accounts from people who knew them, Rufus was happier living with Tacitus than he had ever been with any of his female wives. They were even seen to occasionally, just in a very friendly way, give a little peck on the lips in public and sometime and say they didn't feel like they needed to hide it anymore. Just good friends.
And then Tacitus introduces him to a social group that he's been interacting with, the Grand Sultan's Sacred Cabinet of Enlightenment.
The Grand Sultan's Sacred Cabinet of Enlightenment. I believe mainly his presence was known as a deterrent to their progress. The organization is, like many others, quite secretive, although its membership claims several prominent figures in American history, such as Mark Twain, Thomas Edison, and Neil Diamond. In fact, the song Sweet Caroline was actually a coded message, I believe, to the Grand Lodge of North Carolina to nominate one of their members to run for the state senate there.
Back in 1910, Tacitus Clemens represented Vern Smithfield, an oil magnate, in a tax evasion case against the federal government. After successfully defending his client, Clemens was invited by Smithfield to join his elite social club, the Grand Sultan's Sacred Cabinet of Enlightenment.
Well, my father, was of the Masonic Order of the Grand Sultan's Sacred Cabinet of Enlightenment. The cabinet men, as they would call them, would worship Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite. He, in a little way, was almost like the second coming of the Grand Papa. And so my dad would constantly say, make sure you tie your shoes, make sure you go outside and be a good person, make sure that you eat your vegetables, because Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite is always watching. If I were to walk outside one day with a button unbuttoned or my shirt untucked, my dad would take one of the lemons from the garden and throw it at me. That's the gist of it.
Despite some opposition, Tacitus convinced the other cabinet men to accept Rufus into their ranks.
Well, Tacitus Clemens used Garthwaite's military career and his business leadership as a way to get him on board with the cabinet men.
After Garthwaite's election to the presidency and swift demise, the organization was forced into the public sphere. Having held the office of the presidency even for such a short while, the organization was forced to abide by U.S. tax code, and that apparently has since neutered the ability of the organization to further any of their future plans up to the modern day.
They made the most baffling decision anyone has ever made. They decided to encourage Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite to run for president of the United States of America.
At first, I assumed it was a joke. Me run for president? The thought had never occurred to me before. But now I must admit, the idea intrigues me.
He didn't have any money, so he's got to get donations here and there, kind of run a grassroots, and it eventually becomes pretty successful.
Soon, it was official. The cabinet men had successfully nominated Rufus Garthwaite as the independent candidate. His opponents were two Ohioans, Democrat Governor James Cox, who had previously restricted child labor in the state and helped create Ohio's unified highway system, and Republican Senator Warren G. Harding, whose senatorial career consisted of minor committee assignments.
Warren Harding tearing it up across the country campaigning, and Rufus and Tacitus going toe-to-toe with him at every stop and drawing bigger crowds.
Clemens would become the driving force that instigated Garthwaite's run for presidency. By that point, Garthwaite had given up. Essentially, he was living comfortably, if alone. And then the arrival of Tacitus, the presence itself didn't do much, but there are many journal entries from Mr. Clemens that mentioned his belief that Rufus would be destined for greatness.
Rufus went from town to town, preaching his vision for the next 100 years of American prosperity. And people began to listen.
Because Rufus was a speaker. I mean, all those years as a mascot, the man knew how to play a crowd. He didn't even need to give answers. He just had to speak to the problems people already had. And with Tacitus by his side, he had never felt so confident.
As the campaign went on, the cabinet men felt that their long-laid plans would finally come to fruition.
The office of the presidency was, to the cabinet men, a crucial first step in the establishment of their global pan-Zoroastrianic political cooperation league, which is purportedly the group's main goal, as opposed to the run-of-the-mill Freemasons world domination ideology, which I believe they see as sort of too vague and too abstract of a concept.
For a nation weary of European affairs, Garthwaite's platform was a welcome change.
Garthwaite was very against America's involvement in the war, and part of it was him saying, see, we never wanted to be in it, but we decided to get into it and we won it because we were ultimate and powerful.
the cabinet men attempted to create a political platform for Garthwaite to run on. However, the strength of his personality and his general vigor resisted such efforts, except those made by Tacitus Clemens, who I believe was the source of the more progressive and rational policies of Garthwaite's platform during his candidacy.
My friends, you humble me today. To know that such fine people, such fine Americans support our cause. It reminds me what it is we're campaigning for. A stronger nation, a brighter nation, a better nation. My esteemed opponents, Senator Harding and Governor Cox, refuse to acknowledge our campaign. An outsider, they call me. Well, I say I'm the better for it. For it was the insiders that caused our Great Recession. Insiders that sent American boys to die in a European war. Insiders who have left the poor and downtrodden to go too long forgotten, forcing them to rage against their own homes. Follow me, my friends, my outsiders. Follow me to a better America and a better world.
Did you hear? I mean, it says it all there. I mean, this is, you look at the wording and it's right there. It calls to the outsiders, right? We're outsiders, right? Everyone outside of America, right? Everyone, we're coming together. It calls for a new, better world. He says it. I mean, again, these are facts. I'm just telling you what's in the speech.
Behind closed doors, Harding seethed. He considered James Cox to be no threat, but couldn't understand how Garthwaite had such pull with American voters.
Now, you must understand at this point, the presidential campaign was already well underway. Harding and James M. Cox had been campaigning, but all of a sudden, these little pockets of this insurgent candidacy start springing up, and they are convincing. And they don't go after who would have been regarded at that time in history as regular voters. White Anglo-Saxon Puritan men. They start getting support among German immigrants, the Irish, Jewish people, women in states that allow it, which at the time was unthinkable in a lot of places. And these groups start coming together to push Garthwaite towards the presidency. Garthwaite's platform was poorly thought out in a way typical of him. He simply promised to make things better.
To contemporaries, Rufus's campaign promises seemed odd, but they were working better than anyone could have imagined.
Garthwaite's campaign mostly appealed to Irish Americans because they promised people more alcohol and more potatoes, and it was very good with the German Americans because they said that we will make people stronger and better genetically, and it went well with women because somehow they had convinced the female population that they would no longer be slaves. They weren't slaves, but somehow they had convinced them that they would no longer be slaves.
And are you married?
I am not married.
Garthwaite became increasingly emboldened as anything his opponents threw at him bounced off his campaign like rubber. Any remark he made became a rallying cry to his supporters.
On the campaign trail, Garthwaite would routinely refer to Warren G. Harding as Warren Jarding. It's like he just wasn't even trying.
Garthwaite soon revealed his most surprising decision yet. After Calvin Coolidge and Franklin D. Roosevelt were announced as Harding and Cox's running mates, Garthwaite declared that he would finish the campaign without one.
The position of the vice president is nothing more than a sign of weakness. To choose my own replacement would simply show my opponents that they had won. I will not give them the satisfaction.
Garthwaite declined having running mates or anyone else in his cabinet because he believed that with a backup, it's easier to get assassinated.
Tacitus absolutely did not want to be his vice president because the plan was never for Rufus to win.
Election day came. It was the most shocking landslide victory in American history. Despite Harding's popularity, he was no match for the Garthwaite machine. Rufus had earned 404 electoral votes. Harding had earned 127. James Cox had earned none. On March 4th, 1921, Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite took the oath of office on the steps of the Capitol.
At his inauguration, a funny story, he didn't give any speech. He refrained from giving a speech. Instead, he laughed for 7 minutes. He looked up to the sky. He said, "Fuck you, Dad."
Fuck you, Dad.
Fuck you, Dad.
Fuck you, Dad.
Fuck you, Dad.
And then he choked on a glass of water, which is extremely embarrassing because water is not that easy to choke on. It is liquid. And he coughed so hard, he fell down a flight of stairs and broke his dumb neck.
The crowd was in shock. Medical staff on site confirmed that Rufus had died. With no vice president declared, Congress was quick to convene.
It did lead to one of the greatest constitutional debates in the history of the country. 10 minutes after he died, the entirety of the House and the Senate met together to have a conversation about what to do next, and they eventually decided to just go ahead and have Warren Harding take over the office, since he was technically second place, and just ignore the rest of this that has happened, which is why you don't really hear about it in textbooks. That's a lesson for the kids out there.
As a consolation, and to clear any mention of Garthwaite, James Cox was awarded 127 electoral votes.
Yeah, he died. He didn't die. The death was necessary. The public death, right, was a necessary ploy to really rise to the ranks that he did. He was too powerful. He was too dynamic. He was too much of a powder keg, if you will. And so, yeah, they faked the death. I know that Tacitus didn't want that to be as open as it was. I believe they were gonna try and have it a die in his bed peacefully sort of thing, but that's not the way that he rolled, right? So everything is a big production with him. So
despite the popularity of his campaign, there was no national mourning for the 7-minute president.
Despite its length, is considered the best and most accurate to promises given presidency in the history of the country.
Due to his hatred for Garthwaite, Harding never spoke of him again. Beside himself, Tacitus would be forced to wonder about the unreached potential of his lifelong friend.
I believe that had Rufus Garthwaite held on to the presidency longer, we could have seen the demise of Nazi Germany much, much sooner. That perhaps could have created some form of nuclear catastrophe in Central and Eastern Europe. However, I believe that might have been an effective buffer for Stalin's ambitions to take over Europe at large. So I believe overall the world would have been a slightly better, if not more irradiated place.
As he faded from the history books, only time has brought his legacy to the forefront.
So many outsider political campaigns would never have been possible without Rufus Zechariah Garthwaite out there in front saying you don't need substantive ideas to be handed power in America. All you need is to belligerently yell stuff from a podium.
This man, in such a tiny period of time, gave us so very much. He gave us the modern college mascot, arguably the first professional mascot for sports. He showed us the greatest way to consolidating large, disparate groups of different companies onto one giant mega company to control all of that. He showed us that you can have a lifelong, completely platonic, soul-bound life partner.
And I believe if he were president, he would have gotten rid of taxes completely. We would have probably more fast food chain restaurants on the streets.
If Rufus Zachariah Garthwaite had never been president, The Bachelor would not be a television show.
We need him as the failure story to remind us that people do fail. And if you fail, it's okay. If you fall and break your neck, I mean, that's life. You know, you gotta keep living, you gotta keep going. Even if you die, you can't just rest on the ground.
Failing is what makes you human. The world needs to know that you can fail at anything. You can fail at everything. You could be an awful person. You could have who knows how many illegitimate children and still be great.
Rufus Zachariah Garthwaite is buried on his Virginia estate between the bodies of Tacitus Clemens and Beatrice Fairweather.
If anything bad should happen to me, buried my gold by the fiddlewood tree, sheriff and the posse chasing after me, you know I'm done for, done for.
One lecture where I don't have to address, were Rufus and Tacitus gay? No, they weren't. They were best friends.
What makes you think that?
Really?
Everyone's got an agenda to push, right? But I think that is ridiculous.
If they were gay, would he have said, "My wife says hi"?
Gay people didn't even exist till Obama was president.
And if Garthwaite's gay, that means that I have to, and I don't know.
What are you even basing that on? I don't see anything that seems gay in this story.
I'm a Christian, and there is no evidence.
There's nothing wrong with holding hands and rubbing each other's backs.
He was in a time, in an era that wasn't ready for him. And he was a troubled person.
Garthwaite was straight. It rhymes.
But no, men get close like that. Well, take a look at down in the times of the Greeks.
This is, again, a crack theory. It's not supported substantially by any evidence, and it is not accepted by historians at large.
Why else would he have married a woman if he wasn't attracted to women?
Perverts. All of you perverts. Was it Tilly? Was it Tilly said it?
They were two good friends who spent a lot of time together and lived together like a married couple.
I mean, there's absolutely no way that was happening.
I mean, Rufus was into women. He liked women, obviously. I'm here, right? I came from Rufus and Charlotte. Man and woman. He loved women. It's history. It's just, I'm living proof.
Like I said, I'm only interested in factual information, and so to make that jump just seems. seems a little outlandish to me.
Also, why are we even talking about this? I don't know why we're talking about this. Next question.
Without a shadow of a doubt, he was either gay or bisexual.